how are you managing the risk of having this increased diversity? Right, so managing the risk and leveraging the opportunities, take a guess. What do you need to be doing? Is it surprising? Inspiring and empowering. The consistent thing that people have been telling us, we want a workplace that's inspiring and empowering. So even in the midst of this diversity, you need to be looking at fundamentals. That's one of the key pieces about managing your risk. What are you doing with your fundamentals before you move on? Okay? Managing your risk and this identifying the gaps will be areas if you have been doing strategic manpower planning, you would know where are my gaps, how many am I looking for. So if you're looking at from a job function perspective, for example, in 2010, that's your current workforce. You have 100 planners and based on the current strategy. But in your workforce assumption and moving forward to 2014, if you're expecting X% attrition, you have 24 who are going to retire, and what is your strategy assumption? These are things that you would need because your workforce risk management has to be in touch with what is the business drivers, what's your business risk, all right? And then if you end up in 2014, you have 74 planners with you, you need a total of 93. That means you are 20% down. What are you going to do about that in the meantime? That is first step, knowing what's at risk. The other perspective of what's at risk is, do you know what's at risk from a leadership, a talent, and a market perspective? What's at risk if your current batch of senior managers eventually retire in the next 5 to 10 years? What's your second and third liners plan? Some of the HR people I've been speaking with, they say, what second and third liner? I can't be even keeping my Gen Ys long enough for me to put them through a leadership program. That's a risk, right? If your markets, for example, in 3 to 5 years, 35% of your profitability is going to come from the female consumers, which is a story of one of our clients. What are you going to do if this day you have 0 female salesperson? That's a risk. 35% of profitability may not be fulfilled. It's very much tied into what is your business strategy as you manage your risk from a talent, a leadership, and a market perspective. And keep that in mind. It's not just about doing the numbers. It's about knowing what does a business need from a leadership perspective. Do we need more female leaders? Do we need more age-diverse leaders? Because it is the voices that you bring into the leadership team that's going to be the one that will build the robustness in your organization. Do you know what's the voices from a market perspective? With the way technology is driving things, how many of us actually go online to search out for an item that we are buying before we go to the shop and buy it? Thank you. That's one of the findings that we are seeing from the emerging economies for people who buy cars. In the past, we all go into the showroom and we have a nice try and all those. They realized that the younger generation are actually buying it online, having their view and assessment before they even step into the showroom. What's at risk from a talent perspective? What do you need to be building? What's the market telling you? Have you ever had a chance to think about your risk from a leadership, a talent, and a market perspective? If not, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to just write down very quickly some thoughts that you might have, or you want to go back and ask your leadership what this is all about. What's our potential risk beyond just recruiting and retaining? Okay? Right, moving right along. Managing your opportunities with the risk, and the way you reframe it, there will always be opportunities. All right? So take courage. we have had success stories. I'm going to share with you a couple of success stories, how individual organizations took a leap to take a look at what's at risk 2015, what's at risk 2020, and what are the progressive steps that they have moved on, and some of the results that they have gleaned thus far. From a basic numbers perspective, there's only two ways you can manage your opportunity. One is to increase your future labor supply. The other is to decrease your future labor demand. That's the only way, right? What can we do about it? So the examples that we have, one of the financial firms we work with across Asia had a leadership so-called risk. They realized that for the last 8 years, all the senior leaders, including the board members, were all male. They were all male. They were all in their 50s for the longest time. And they realized that the world there is changing, but we are not having enough voices in the room. They need to add a little bit more diversity in there. So from a leadership perspective, they realized that there's a risk because the voices in the room were not reflective of the markets. Sure, you can say, well, we bring in market reports, we bring in studies, etc. But what goes on in the room that makes the decision is in the room. Okay? So what they did was that they actively looked at what's hindering women from progressing up to leadership roles. This is not about quota. They decided that's not the way to do it. They decided, let's look at how we can remove the barriers that the talent will rise. It's not about filling a number. So when they went in and they took a look, what are the barriers? What are our talented women? Why is it at a certain point in time they just tell us that, this is it? They began to remove some of those barriers that could be, from some of you, you may relate to it, work-life issues, mobility issues, right? And they work around what are some of the other offerings, and within 4.5 years, they began to have women who met their promotional criteria, and their peers agree that they are as good as them in sitting around the table. So they saw the risk. They did something to manage that risk, and they did something that is sustainable to manage that risk. And that's the other thing I wanted to say. Don't give yourself a shot in the arm and realize that it's not sustainable. It's something to be sustainable. Another example, healthcare, talent perspective. You can't, for example, open an additional ward in a hospital if you do not have enough nurses. How many of you would like to be lying there and there's nobody looking after you? Right? You can't open a ward if you do not have a minimum number of talent. So, looking at how Singapore was growing as a medical hub, everybody was scrambling for talent. So where can we get that talent pool to come in to start? So one of the organization did was that they went and they tracked down their retirees. And they invited them back on different, I suppose, work schemes, rosters, etc., that would fit the lifestyles of their returning workforce. And they redesigned the way work and rosters get done so that they meet that talent need. So the risk was talent shortage. The opportunity was to look at non-traditional workforce, not just hiring from the outside of Singapore. So think about it from your perspective. Leader, talent. If they're at risk, what might be some of your solutions? The last one had to do with market. One of our oil and gas clients in an emerging economy realized going forward, many of those who will be their distributors will be female. And they realized that they don't have sufficient female salesperson to be going out, to be looking after these distributors. So what they did was to hire an equal amount of women as they exited from school. Now, this is not about lowering the hiring standards. This is looking for women who would meet the hiring standards as their male peers, bring them in, and in a very male-dominated industry, get them to thrive. Because one of the key pieces was they found out that the women distributors of those countries like to talk to women versus being serviced by a man. And Lynch was telling me earlier, your speaker before lunch, that cultural diversity, cultural differences does make a difference. So get to know what that means from a market perspective. How can you strategize to meet that market needs? So what they did was they hired the females of equal number. That was 18 months ago, and we are just about to head back in to see them this season. And the report that we have been having is that the managers who did the hiring and supervising finally, about 6 months ago, came up and said, okay, they are doing well. We are no longer managing them with gloves. They are okay to be in a male-dominated industry. So the main thing is that they took a step of courage, and they realized that if they don't, they will lose the market, because the market is telling you we're going to have more women as distributors. So what is your business telling you? Are you helping them manage that risk or turn that into an opportunity? That would be fantastic. So managing a risk from a decreased future demand perspective, there's only two things. You increase your productivity, which is all your automation, for example, streamlining, increase productivity. Or you decide what you will do in-house and what you will outsource. Two opportunities there for you to do. If you were looking at increasing your future labor supply, you could be giving a lot of sponsorships for people to study, etc. But we all have had interesting experience. People return from being sponsored, and after a while, the challenge of retaining them would be the same. So what are your other opportunity of increasing your labor force? Look at other deployments. I know this is challenging because people will say, oh, I've been trained for this job. You want me to move to somewhere else, it's going to be difficult. Nobody is going to say that it's easy. The transition is going to be challenging. But one of the key pieces is if this person realized by 2014 their job is going to be gone, do you think they would like to be transiting? Right, so part of looking at your overall plan as you do your strategic HR planning is looking at the pieces and how these pieces might be deployed and begin the transition process. Training, cross-training and accelerated capabilities. And by these, we are not just looking at the deployment issue, but looking at what are the capabilities that you need and how can you accelerate that learning. Is it by coaching? Is it by immersive learning? Is it by sending somebody out for an attachment? What is it that will accelerate their capability? That would be the best use of your investment budget. Increased talent engagement. This is a no-brainer. Almost all your engagement studies will show you that with engagement, you have higher productivity. So that's one gain. With engagement, it is a better workplace. You'll be a natural magnet for talent, right? The last one, recruit from non-traditional source. And we see that increasingly this is happening because your traditional sources are drying up. Or your traditional sources are competing in a manner that you can't keep up. So if you were to offer somebody and they turn you down and they said, oh, the salary is too low, and you up it by a certain amount, how much can you play this game within a very tight labor market? Look at what are the other non-traditional resources that you can tap into.